Welcome to the Legacy Radio Network. This is the Everything Financial Radio Show. I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen. Glad you're with me today. Have another great show lined up for you. We'll be talking once again with Laurence Kotlikoff. Actually, by popular demand, I will be rebroadcasting the interview that I did with Professor Kotlikoff about a month ago. Professor Kotlikoff has a very, very amazing resume. He served as an economic advisor to President Reagan. He has been an author or co-author of 14 books on economic topics. He's also running for president as a third-party candidate, has some great and some interesting ideas. I know you're going to find it fascinating, so stay with us. Also, Mr. Joe Stiglitz, a recognized economist, was quoted this past week in Business Insider as saying that the global economic system as it exists today is doomed to fail. I'm going to share with you a bit from that article. The IMF is now publicly stating that a euro breakup is possible after just a month ago stating that it was not going to happen. They were going to do what they could, and they had a policy response in place that would keep the euro from failing. You know, I go back to my saying, I live by this when it comes to policymakers and politicians. I never believe anything is true until it's been officially denied. The IMF officially denied the euro would break up about a month ago. Now, Christine Lagarde is saying that the euro breakup is possible. We'll share a bit with you from that. Also, Italy, their number one export. What do you think it is? If you guessed gold bars, you are correct. The number one Italian export now, gold bars. We'll give you some information on that. Also, some more evidence of some pension funding problems. And finally, a blog entry I found this past week, Elmo explains the national debt. Quick reminder, if you've not attended one of our discovery groups, we are holding discovery groups all around West Michigan. We will be at AMG Business Center over in Norton Shores. That's the Muskegon area on Tuesday, April the 24th. We'll be out at Sunnybrook Country Club in Granville on Thursday, May the 3rd. And on Thursday, May the 10th, we'll be at Centennial Country Club in Grand Rapids. If you've not attended a discovery group in the last 3 months and you'd like to attend, we have new content 3 months ago. We'll be talking about the current economic winter season. We'll talk about what we believe lies ahead and what it might mean for you and your family. You can get more information on the discovery groups by going to personallegacyseminars.com. That is personallegacyseminars.com. Just click on the date and location. You'll get more information, and there is a place to register, again, if you've not attended a discovery group in the last several months. I am privileged to have on the Everything Financial Radio Show today Mr. Laurence Kotlikoff. Mr. Kotlikoff is a William Fairfield Warren Professor at Boston University. He's a professor of economics at Boston University. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the Econometric Society, easy for me to say, a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. He received his BA in economics from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in economics from Harvard University in 1977. Professor Kotlikoff is the author or co-author of 14 books and publishes extensively in newspapers, magazines. He writes a lot about the issues of financial reform, personal finance, taxes, Social Security. He served as a consultant to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and many of the central banks around the world. He's also provided expert testimony to committees of Congress, including the Senate Finance Committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, the Joint Economic Committee. He is currently also running for president, which we'll talk to him about, and we are very, very pleased to have Professor Kotlikoff with us on the show today. So welcome.
Hey, my pleasure.
Professor, let's jump right in if we could. Our listeners are hearing a lot about the multiple lifelines being thrown to Greece to help them with their sovereign debt situation. We have Portugal, Italy, and Spain waiting in the wings, so to speak. Give us your take on the European debt situation and how it might play out.
Well, in the case of Greece, it's not clear that they've gone far enough in terms of restructuring, defaulting on their debt, and they may well have to do another major default in the future because they're still sitting there with about 120% of debt of GDP in the form of official debt, and then they've got some unofficial liabilities that are significant. So they're still in very tough shape. In the case of Italy and Spain and Portugal and Ireland, we're also talking about significant fiscal problems. In some ways, not as severe as in other countries, but their economies are in tough shape, particularly in Spain. So the European Central Bank has committed to printing money for the next 3 years to keep interest rates really low so that banks can borrow. So the name of the game here is have your private banks, in the case of Italy, borrow from the central bank, from the European Central Bank at 1%, and then take that money and spend it on your government's bonds. So it's in effect a backdoor way for the European Central Bank to fund these governments. That'll work great until inflation takes off. And so, in other words, many countries that can't pay their bills have used the central bank of their country to print money to cover their problems, and that leads to inflation, if not hyperinflation.
Professor, in a recent op-ed in the Fiscal Times, you commented on U.S. debt and U.S. liabilities, and you wrote that deficit accounting is a generational Ponzi scheme. You also commented that our country's fiscal gap is currently over $200 trillion. Can you explain what you mean by a generational Ponzi scheme, and what is a fiscal gap, and how might it affect our listeners?
Okay, so imagine you have a government like ours which goes to young people and says, here, give me some taxes. I'm going to give these to older people, and when you're old, don't think about these as taxes, because when you're old, you're going to get these taxes back with interest plus a whole lot more. Okay, and then we start that out in 1950, and then when that set of young people become older, we do it again. We go to the next set of young people and say, look, we have these obligations to the current old people. We're going to take taxes from you, but don't think about them as taxes, because when you're old, you're going to get these back with a whole lot more. So what we're doing here is setting up obligations. What we're doing is we're calling the contributions taxes as opposed to borrowing. And that's a way of keeping the obligations to pay these Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits and Medicaid benefits to the elderly off the books. So we're now sitting here with a huge fiscal gap, and let me describe how that is defined. What you do is you look at the assets of the country, which is of the government, which is the value in the present of all the future taxes that are projected to be collected. So that's the government's assets. On the other side of the balance sheet are its liabilities. Some of these liabilities are the official debt. That's about $11 trillion. Then there's these unofficial liabilities that have been kept off the books because of careful wording, because we've called this taking from the young taxes rather than borrowing. And those other liabilities are the present value, the value in the present of all the future expenditures for health care, on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and other expenditures by the federal government, for example, paying for defense expenditures. So all the non-interest expenditures have a certain present value. You add the official debt to that other liability. Now you've got the total liabilities, and you compare those with the total assets, and the difference is the fiscal gap. So this is just bookkeeping, balance sheet bookkeeping for the government. It's very straightforward, and it shows that the liabilities, the official liabilities and the unofficial liabilities, exceed the assets by $211 trillion. And the numbers underlying these calculations are coming from the Congressional Budget Office. So we are bankrupt as a country at this point, given the policies we're running.
Well, you mentioned policies, and in a week or next week on the show, or perhaps the following week, there is a U.S. congressman coming on that we're going to talk to about policy. But given the course of action being pursued by the policymakers and politicians now as a whole, and assuming that course of action doesn't change, what's the end game?
Well, the end game is this will blow up in the faces of the baby boomers and their kids. We are leaving an enormous, humongous bill for our children, and they just can't afford it. We can't triple their taxes compared to what we're paying, their tax rates. So either we're going to have major benefit cuts in a very drastic manner, or we're going to have to, or the government will start printing money to try and pay for these bills. And that's the most likely scenario in the short run, that as the deficit gets bigger and bigger, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, will try and monetize it by just printing money and buying up these treasury bonds that the government goes to the market, sells treasury bonds, takes in money to pay, let's say, old people their benefits, and then the Fed prints up new money and goes and buys up those treasury bonds that just have been sold to the public. And that's the process by which a central bank monetizes its debt, and that leaves the public with a lot more money chasing the same number of goods, and that leads to inflation. So this could lead to, we've already seen the Fed since 2007 almost quadruple the base money supply. So we have in place already the basis for a quadrupling of prices. So what will happen, I think, is we're facing major inflation unless we can get these expenditures under control and also get our tax revenue up.
We are chatting with Professor Laurence Kotlikoff. We will continue our conversation with him and talk more about his views on the economy and his presidential candidacy. And we'll do that when Everything Financial Radio returns. Stay with us.